report. I know it's late in Nairobi. I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, colleague, distinguished guests today, let me just kick things off and begin. This event will feature issues of homelessness and affordable housing on the International Homeless Day. This is part of a wider effort of Urban October, which celebrates urban and housing issues over the course of the month of October, and we're really pleased to collaborate with IGH and DESA to bring some light to this issue and have a series of speakers who can help us. The flow of this session, about 90 minutes, will be an opening remarks from Daniela Boss and Robert Louis Ledington, a testimonial on homelessness from Liz Madden, some keynote addresses from Dan Louise Casey, Christine Bernhardt, and Freek Spinowinj. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that Dutch name well. Apologies. And then some way forward practical suggestions on what's working from Iris Bailey. And then we're going to open it up to a bit of Q&A and then try to pull together some recurring themes and ideas for this. So that's the flow. And I would just encourage people to use the chat as we seem to all be learning to do to generate your ideas and thoughts and quick responses. And we'll be keeping track of that chat so that we can tie it into the Q&A session at the end. So without any further ado, let me shift over to Daniela, who is a friend and colleague from DESA, and just give you some very brief background on Daniela, which I must say, Daniela, I didn't realize that you had done all these things. This is terrific. You are currently the director of DESA's Division of Inclusive Social Development. This is the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, based at the Secretariat headquarters in New York. And you have a tremendous amount of experience in international politics, human rights, and social development. You've served as a senior consultant designated by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an expert on human rights. And you have also been involved with a number of institutes and served as an advisor, including the presidency of the Council of Ministers, the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, designated member of the Board of Directors of the European Union Agency of Fundamental Rights, and an advisor, if that's not enough, to the Vice Presidency of the European Commission. Long story short, Daniela brings a tremendous amount of experience to this issue. It's committed to human rights and has approached this through many different vehicles, both in government circles and the international community. With that, Daniela, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, I have a strong background in human rights, and now as a director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development in DESA, which is one of the 3 pillars of the United Nations, the development pillar. I'm very, very proud of providing advice and supporting the development of policies that are needed. We do need a strong policy frameworks at national level to be able then to operationalize human rights. So it's a very different and at the same time similar perspective. And I'm very pleased to deliver this message on the occasion of the World Homeless Day, the 10th of October. And I'm really, really particularly pleased that UN-Habitat and UN DESA jointly organized this event, and the very first time actually that we are celebrating this day that has been established in 2010 together. We are having a fantastic working relationship with the UN-Habitat that plays a key role in the topic that we are going to be discussing today, that is homelessness. I would really like to take this opportunity to thank UN-Habitat for our excellent collaboration. Also, when it came to the expert group meeting and preparing the proceedings of the meeting into a publication, actually, that we are launching today, from what I understand. And I hope this report will be useful and guide policymakers to effectively prevent and address homelessness. So, ladies and gentlemen, the issue of homelessness was discussed at the United Nations Commission for Social Development and its 58th session in February this year, under the priority theme of affordable housing and social protection systems for all to address homelessness, while UN-Habitat was having a huge conference in another part of the world, but that will be up to UN-Habitat to talk about, again, on this very same issue. So we really want, work jointly together. The Commission also heard the voices of those who experience homelessness, and they're powerful voices. They're still resonating in many of those who participated in that panel discussion. And at the end of the Commission last February, member states adopted the first, in 75 years, since the UN was established, the first UN resolution on addressing homelessness in its, as I said, 70 years of history. And then this was subsequently adopted at the ECOSOC Council in June this year, and it has become an ECOSOC resolution. So this resolution provides a common language to describe homelessness, which is very key, as a complex issue, and the need for a whole of government and whole of society actions to address its multifaceted drivers. So the resolution had the merit of providing a common language, as I said, to address the issue both in developed and developing countries, emphasizing the need to move beyond the definition of homelessness as a mere lack of physical housing towards a broader understanding of it. And, we came out with something like homelessness as a condition. It's a condition where a person or a household lacks habitable space, which may compromise their ability to enjoy social relations. And I would like to congratulate you all, actually, because you have been working tirelessly on preventing and addressing homelessness, all the panelists present today in one way or another, and providing assistance to those who are experiencing homelessness around the world. And without these efforts, we couldn't have achieved this result to start with, or to carry on what others already started discussing about homelessness years ago. So, ladies and gentlemen, homelessness is a global problem affecting people of different ages and with different backgrounds in both developed and developing countries. And in recent years, homelessness has become increasingly visible, particularly in larger cities across regions. And today, COVID-19, this pandemic, is having devastating impacts on all people, but in particular, those living in poverty, the working poor, those living in homelessness, including those in urban informal settlements and on the streets and other open spaces. So under the current circumstances, many more people are at risk of falling into homelessness because of job loss, because of income reduction, and because of consequent risk of eviction. At the same time, the COVID-19 highlighted that all lives matter, and the well-being of people, regardless of their backgrounds, should be taken into serious consideration. It is also demonstrated that with strong political will, decisive actions can be taken in a much shorter time frame. We have to take action quickly. For example, several governments swiftly took temporary measures such as eviction moratoriums and unemployment benefits, and others have provided some form of temporary accommodation for thousands of individuals during the pandemic, not only governments, but also civil society organizations made significant efforts in the front lines, providing food, and other necessary items, helping those who need medical and mental attention, raising funds for helping others. The worst health crisis also brought the goodness out of people, though. Let's not forget about that. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks 75 years since the United Nations was created. And 75 years ago, the UN was established to overcome a major crisis the world was facing. After the Second World War, the world needed to be rebuilt. The world needed to be built better, back again. And after 75 years, the world is facing another major crisis. And we have to find ways to rebuild and to build it back better. We have to work united. And 25 years ago, there was the World Social Summit on development, on social development, the very first one, and the only one so far. And already 25 years ago, the outcome of that document, the Social Summit outcome document, known also as Copenhagen 1995, and this year we're celebrating its 25th birthday, included the commitment to reaffirm, promote, and strive to ensure the realization of the rights set out in relevant international instruments and declarations, and particularly in order to assist people who are living in poverty. And the commitment one says to creating an economic, political, social, cultural, and legal environment that will enable people to achieve social development and protect them from shelter. So I'm very glad to have been invited here, to have been given the time that has been allotted. And if you have to have a takeaway from what I shared with you, I hope that you will take as a takeaway, you will remember that the event today is the first milestone to celebrate the World Homelessness Day, to raise awareness and take real concrete actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate your introductory comments and helping to set the stage, especially institutionally. Yes, a lot of progress is made, and having something come out of Ethos Council is no small accomplishment. So thank you so much for that and your commitment to this. And we share your appreciation for our partnership with DESA and UN-Habitat. I'm going to shift to the Habitat side. And I'm not going to speak today, but my colleague, Robert Louis Lettington, will. And Robert is bringing a lot to this discussion. He's currently holding the position of Chief of the Land, Housing, and Shelter Section in UN-Habitat at our headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. He has about 20 years of experience working in a myriad of functional activities of program management, multilateral processes, and technical assistance in policy formulation and legislation. He's worked with many different partners in many different countries and has extensive experience in both human rights, land management, rule of law, urban development, legislative drafting, and intellectual property rights and information, digital governance, environment and natural resources, and international trade. Robert is definitely a Renaissance man. He's bringing a lot to this discussion, and we're really grateful to have him. He has been able to work with a lot of different institutions in addition to UN-Habitat, and is served as the Salzburg Global Fellow on Law and Technology, and is a member of the International Law Association, as well as a member of the Human Rights Lawyers Association, UK. He holds a doctorate degree, a Juris Doctorate in law from the College of William and Mary in the United States, a master's degree specializing in architectural history from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and a Master of Literature degree in history specializing in land and population displacement from the University of the Highlands and Islands in Scotland. Robert, it's terrific to have you here today. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I hope you can hear me okay.
Very well.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Yeah, I don't know, Renaissance man or just lawyer who interferes in everything that comes along. You can take your pick, but hopefully I can add a little bit to the discussions today. Firstly, ladies, gentlemen, friends, colleagues, it's a real honor to be able to address a group like this on a day like today. There are few things that are more important in life than trying to work out how we can make some sort of meaningful progress on an issue like homelessness. It's something that all of us have seen. It's something that all of us have at least some awareness of, but I can't help thinking always that unless you've actually experienced homelessness yourself, it's never something you're going to fully understand. So to be able to work with a group as diverse as this is a great honor. I'm also extremely grateful to Daniela Bass, who just made her comments, for the collaboration and also for the very kind words that she had for both Habitat and the partners. This has also been an extremely rewarding experience for us over the last short period we've been working on this publication, and we hope it's something that will continue forwards. My team are noting that this is the first ever event that has been organized between UN Habitat and UN DESA to celebrate World Homelessness Day. Celebrate, I don't know, to celebrate the fact that we can make progress on the issue, I think. But I hope that this will be far from the first and last. This is something that I would like to see become a very clear fixture of Urban October and the efforts that we are trying to make around the world. Of course, we're also grateful for UN DESA to join with us, not just in this event, but also on the work around this topic and the development of the publication itself. Turning to the issue itself, I mean, in most cases, the homeless are not only vulnerable because of the homelessness that they face. We're crucially aware that homelessness is often the symptom of other challenges, and that similarly, securing a home can be a critical step in addressing those other challenges, whether they come from financial situation, social breakdown, mental health, or other factors. Looking at that and then noting that to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights is one of the three basic pillars of the United Nations in its charter, there is something that we have to address here. A human rights-based approach demands that we have to protect the rights of those facing the greatest vulnerabilities and challenges. And there can be very few who doubt that the homeless are amongst those most vulnerable and challenged groups. If we are to make our cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, then we must address homelessness. And as I think a few people in chatting before the event formally opened noted, we know clearly from the COVID experience that this is within the power and the gift of governments around the world. It can be done. So, and we know what the tools are to approach this. The question is, can we gather the sufficient political will? Can we bring in the right audience to push this forward and maintain a consistent approach over time? Not an approach that lasts for 6 months or a year, but one that works year in and year out. I hope that this publication and this meeting will help contribute to developing that momentum. The process for the current publication started in Nairobi in May last year. It seems more than a lifetime ago with what has gone on recently. We had an expert group meeting of the old variety, where we actually had people in a room discussing with each other, looking at questions of affordable housing and social protection systems for all to address homelessness. We looked at the major drivers, we looked at the major gaps in policy and the priority areas for action. And from that took out a series of policy recommendations. The world may have changed since then, but I think when we look at the responses that have succeeded in addressing homelessness under the COVID scenario, many of the policy recommendations that were made before we'd even thought of COVID have proved to be the valid solutions, and they have been proved to be workable. Since then, DESA and Habitat have also been part of shaping a global discussion with a lot of you here to see what can be done to take this forward. The 58th session of the Commission for Social Development that was referred to earlier adopted the first United Nations draft resolution on homelessness. That has then gone on to the Economic and Social Council. The Economics and Social Council then adopted their own resolution in June 2020. That reflects the key issues as we see them related to homelessness. It contains clear policy recommendations to prevent and address homelessness through affordable housing and solid social protection policies. It's a holistic approach that's worked. Member states have said they intend to do it. We now need to follow up and make sure that they do that at the national level. These milestones come at a time when it's become even clearer that ending homelessness must be a priority in all governments' political agendas. This is a universal question. Deep-rooted inequalities in cities globally have heavily influenced the degree and nature of COVID-19 impacts and are leading the pandemic's disproportional impact on groups that were already facing a situation of greater vulnerability. The homeless already, we know, faced greater medical indicators, faced greater security indicators, faced greater problems in how they engage with the law. The impact of the law in many countries is far heavier on homeless people than others, and COVID is making this worse. It's also pre-exacerbated all of the pre-existing vulnerabilities that expose people to homelessness. Informal workers who've lost their jobs, the challenges and the weaknesses of social protection systems that are trying to stretch to cover far greater numbers, challenges around evictions and rents, challenges of slums and informal settlements where there is lack of security of tenure over houses. All of these have created greater challenges and have had very severe impacts on the poorest. The excuses may be many for why action is taken, sometimes by public actors, sometimes by private, but invariably the impact is falling upon those who are least able to cope with it. In responding to the pandemic, different countries have demonstrated that homelessness can be ended. It requires coordinated and effective interventions. It needs to integrate housing, health, employment, and education perspectives. But this has been done. A number of countries and local governments have taken extraordinary measures, and they have shown the way to end homelessness almost entirely. That this can be done through a supportive framework. It's critical to ensure that the provision of these temporary and emergency measures is not left as a temporary thing. It must be sustained, it must be maintained and followed up. And doing that will require a new understanding of homelessness that is fully inclusive, is multidisciplinary, and takes into account political, social, and economic requirements, as well as reviewing the current approaches in a number of areas. So finally, to move on, the EGM report itself is now ready, is published, and we're happy to share that with everybody. Affordable housing and social protection systems for all to address homelessness. It collects and analyzes the contributions of the experts from the meeting and hopes to deepen the understanding of the complex causes of hopelessness. It's available now. We want to engage with all of you on that as a starting point. What's missing, we will add. What needs to be changed or updated, we will work on that with you. This should be a process and a conversation that belongs to all of us. And as was mentioned previously as well, one of the vital things is to hear from those who have the experience of homelessness, who can then speak to what the realities are and what the most effective solutions might be. Finally, thank you again to DESA, to the experts who will contribute to this panel discussion, and to everybody who can attend or listen in any way. Share your knowledge, share your experiences, suggest best practices, suggest innovative solutions, anything that will help to contribute to end homelessness and draw more attention to the fact that this is an achievable goal will be very, very gladly welcomed by us, and we will seek to amplify it at every opportunity. I wish you a great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Really appreciate the overview, and thanks especially for grounding this discussion in a human rights-based approach. I like the formulation that if we're trying to advance sustainable urban development, by definition, this requires that we address homelessness, and that these should not be seen as parallel things. They are really, homelessness is a key element of sustainable urban development. And I appreciate also the reference to COVID and how this has deepened existing and historical forms of inequality and hit very hard on homeless populations, particularly as they interface with the law. And I appreciate also the concept of we have something that's come out of ECOSOC. It's terrific. It's a resolution, but where do we go from here? What's the level of accountability? How do we get member states to pick this up? So very much appreciated. And then, of course, your last point that we need to look at this issue from many different angles. And this brings us to the next phase of our discussion today. We're going to hear from Liz Maiden a bit of the perspective of homelessness, testimonials and stories. Liz is a mother of one from York City, Ireland. She works with the Cork Anti-Poverty Resource Network. It's a 40-year agency that works towards empowering people who are experiencing poverty. She holds a master's degree in women's studies and has previously lectured at University College York on women's studies, on the women's studies diploma program. Today, Liz is going to zero in on some of her life successes and how she overcome challenges with homelessness and abuse, particularly in the home setting. She'd like to be as upfront and clear with us about the realities that we're talking about, which I think are extremely important for us to augment our discussions of policy and legislation. So Liz, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher, and thanks for having me here, really, and for including the voices of people who've had lived experience, which is really the key to understanding homelessness. And I actually liked how Daniela used the word celebration, because I actually feel like I am a celebration. If we were here discussing somebody overcoming addiction or poverty, we would say it's a celebration. So I feel like I am to be celebrated, that I've actually overcome this experience of homelessness more than once in my life. And so I guess to help understand homelessness is to include the people who have like the lived experience. So from my own experience, I guess it's funny because we hear the word displacement, and I guess I felt displaced even in my own family home. As a child, I never felt a sense of belonging. So I think it's kind of interesting, but that's probably the start of my homelessness journey, was never feeling a sense of belonging, which led me down a road of addiction and just, falling into being around the wrong people, the wrong places. I lost myself in my life, and my first time becoming homeless was due to an addiction. And after that, I found myself in a very unhealthy relationship. And again, I had another experience of homelessness due to escaping that relationship. So I guess we hear a lot about domestic violence and homelessness. And I guess it's good to be able to say from lived experience that this is true. These are causes of homelessness. Addictions are causes of homelessness. And also, family of origin, coming from a home with an abusive parent, also led to my homelessness. And I think as well, it's good to focus on the positives and kind of what led me out of homelessness, because that's the advocate that I want to be. I want to really inspire other people and to tell them that, yes, even if you're experiencing homelessness, there is a route out of homelessness. And I guess for me, it wasn't as easy as just being given a home. Really, being given a home was just the first step towards my end of homelessness. And I'm lucky that I linked in with a really great agency, Sophia Housing in Ireland, where I had a support worker who really worked with me on my level, I'll say. She never did anything for me. We always collectively worked on things together. She was the first person who ever suggested to me, would I think about going to university? Nobody in my family ever went to university. I never thought it was never in my vision. So I think being given a home is not always going to end homelessness. For a lot of people, it's a mentality, it's a frame of mind. For me, I would just, my go-to place was just running away, escaping situation. So it was like I had to unbrainwash myself in a way. I had to learn a new way of living, and this assisted support in Sophia Housing gave that to me. It helped me to think a different way about life, and it gave me consistency, and it gave me time and space to really think out what got me in this position in the first place. And really, it wasn't just the support, it was the type of support and the approach of support. And I would really like experts to really, I guess, listen in on this, because there's like all different types of support, but the most effective and empowering support is when you work side by side with somebody. Don't do for the person, don't assume the person isn't able, but just have open discussions. Ask that person, what do you think you're capable of doing, or what can we do together? So it was this kind of support, I guess, that empowered me to really have a stable life. And that consistent support and aftercare support, I think, might be an important link to when we're thinking about ending homelessness. And a lot of the time, I think people just think, just give them a home and they'll be fine. But a lot of people actually end up homeless because of trauma, and trauma, it doesn't go away overnight. You can't just hand somebody a key to a home and think all their trauma is going to be gone with it. So I think giving people, well, at least in my case, giving me that support worker and somebody who would just be patient, and however long it took me, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, that person stayed with me throughout those years until I was at a place where I could move forward in life. So I think that type of approach was incredible, and was the approach and the support that led me out of homelessness in the end. And I do feel celebrating. I feel like celebrating today. I am celebrating. I'm not homeless, and I've actually worked through my process, and it's great to be here. And if anybody has any questions afterwards, don't hold back. If I can offer any insight in any sort of a way, I'd be happy to do that. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. Really helpful to get your perspective, and what resonates for me very much. And I saw this with a lot of people that I work with at homeless shelters earlier in my life. The house and the physical is one, but that internal piece, getting into a different mindset, recognizing that the thinking and the trauma is something that stays with you longer, even if your conditions improve, and you have to work that through. So I'm really happy that you're emphasizing that, and giving people a general picture of really the combination of things that are necessary to address homelessness in all of its meaning. And I'm particularly in that sense. I think and it's nice that the term celebration is recurring in this discussion so far. Yes, there's cause for skepticism. We're not really out of the woods yet globally by any means on homelessness, but there are individuals who've taken issues into their hands and moved their particular situation. They've become empowered to do things that they never thought they could do, like go to university. That was, as you said, it wasn't even on your horizon. So I really see that as a form of celebration that is inspirational. So I really appreciate this. Thank you. We're going to shift gears again in this session, having had the opening remarks and then some testimonials that Liz just gave, to 3 keynote addresses, and that will begin with, and we're very pleased to have Ms. Dame Louise Casey, the chair and the advisory committee of the Institute of Global Homelessness, to be with us today. She has a lot of experience in this space, and she's been working on social policy programs more generally, not confined to homelessness with the UK government. And her previous experiences have been leading a UK homeless charity shelter, and she has also been really kind of sticking her neck out on addressing issues both with individuals and with families. She was appointed as the UK homelessness czar in 1999 and led a successful strategy to reduce the number of people sleeping rough on the streets. And she has gone on to lead the Troubled Families Program and Respect Task Force, and has also served as the first Victims Commissioner, where she led flagship reviews into child sexual exploitation and social integration in some of the UK's most isolated communities. Throughout her career, she has maintained her commitment to the charity sector and has been a driving force in the establishment of the Institute of Global Homelessness. We're really pleased to have her here today, and as with DESA, we're thankful that we're partnering with you and collaborating in every way that we can. I think this is a nice combination of different parts of the UN system and an organization like the Institute, as well as individuals who are challenged with homelessness, who are addressing this on a day-by-day basis. So with that, Luis, over to you.
I'm very lucky to have a kitchen.
You have muted, correct? Great.
Am I unmute?
You're good. Yeah, you're good. You're perfect.
Kitchen.
We can hear you, and you're fine. Thank you.
Fine. Okay, that's all good. And you're on a shoebox on the table, so I'm just hoping this all pieces together seamlessly.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Listen, first of all, Chris, I want to say sort of huge thank you to both yourself and Daniela and UN-Habitat and UN DESA, Makiko, Christophe Lalande, who had the honour to meet last year in Nairobi. There's too many people to mention, but I think it's extraordinary that you have kept this up, you know, the campaign, the work, the energy, the determination. And I think, Daniela, you sort of summed it up really powerfully when you said that basically what's really important as we think about where we are 75 years into the UN, in the year of possibly the worst global pandemic that the world has so far seen, that actually homelessness has been right front and center of it in many ways, because we've all across the globe, whether we've done it well or done it less well, or in some cases done it very badly, people have had to actually figure out what they're going to do to either support or actually criminalize people who are homeless. So I think, Daniela, you were completely right to set that framework at the beginning. I am going to follow in my fellow countryman Robert's footsteps. So Robert, you said you were an interfering lawyer. I think I would describe myself as an interfering social policy maker. Maybe that's something that Brits have in common, is we can end up being very irritating to governments and others. So look, what I want to talk about today is that right now it's my profound belief that we know that we can tackle homelessness. And when I first went to Nairobi, which is a good 18 months ago, and met Makiko from UN DESA and Christophe Lalande from UN-Habitat and many other wonderful, wonderful colleagues, and I must say at this point, the UN working group to end homelessness, the NGO working group, chaired at that moment by the very wonderful Father Memo, and now is now chaired by the equally wonderful sisters of Jean O'Dwyer, Jean Quinn, sorry, and Margaret O'Dwyer. Marvellous leadership from the UN NGO sector, of which I'm privileged that the Institute of Global Homelessness is just a very tiny part. I think that we have come so far in such a short period of time, and that's why I was so delighted that actually UN DESA and UN-Habitat wanted to proceed with this session today. So the coronavirus has shown us in the United Kingdom that when we want to end homelessness, we can. And that's very, very profound, because 20 years ago, the United Kingdom decided it wanted to significantly reduce homelessness, and the numbers of people, according to our definitions, dropped to about 500 from 10,000. And during COVID-19 this year, the whole country, all the charities, all the councils, basically decided that we couldn't have people either sleeping on the streets or in overcrowded communal shelters, because essentially that would put their risk of the virus through the roof, forgive the pun, not intended, and it would also show so clearly that people would become what we would call super spreaders. And so in a matter of weeks, first 5,000 people were brought in to vacant properties. We used hotels, we used universities, we used hostels for tourists, we used holiday camps, we used anything, and that number has crept to around about 23,000 people as I sit before this Zoom call, WebEx call today. And I think what happened, and I think this is where Christopher and Robert have set this in a very helpful policy framework, is actually it's not just the people that were on the streets who our social protection flaws had left behind. It also pointed to the enormous vulnerability of people who had some roof over their head or in terribly overcrowded conditions and actually couldn't stay there and were chucked out during the pandemic. So I think though the upside has shown that we can solve this problem if we want to, the downside is it's shown for me quite how complicated and difficult it is, and that the COVID pandemic shines this light on the fragility of our social protection systems worldwide. And I would include in that the United Kingdom, which is it's either the 5th or 6th richest economies in the world. So there is hope, but we have to be alive to the size of the problem and the complicated problem. Now, the next thing I want to show you, and actually Francesca has been absolutely marvellous, is I'm going to show you something really simple, which is a picture of a bathtub. Thank you, Francesca. This is incredible. And forgive me, colleagues at UN DESA and Habitat. But here we are. This is when I applied to the British government to become their homelessness czar, I walked in and said, this is like an overflowing bathtub. And I just want to very briefly talk about this today, because I know I've talked about it at the UN Commission in February, but I just want to be clear that if you want to solve homelessness, you have to be clever. It's not just necessarily pouring money into something or deciding to shelter your way out of homelessness. You can't do those two things. What you have to do first up is if anybody has got a bath and that bath is overflowing, the first thing you do when you run into the bathroom is you switch the taps off. And we don't spend a lot of time in social policy thinking about how we prevent a problem. We spend a lot of time diving into the bathtub and trying to come up with relief and come up with solutions, but we don't actually think, how do we solve homelessness? So even during this pandemic in the United Kingdom, over 1,000 people were discharged from prison or hospital and ended up in the hotels or in our hostel system. And we know if we want to solve homelessness, we have to switch those taps off. So prevention is absolutely at the centre of how you solve homelessness. When I was with colleagues in Nairobi and UN-Habitat, they talked to me about the Kibera slum actually in Nairobi, and explained that actually if you simply decant people into their own homes for rent, some of those families will go back to the slum, rent the property out, because education is not free after a certain age in Nairobi. So if you want to solve a problem, for example, that problem, you have to think about aspiring parents that actually want their children to have a better future than their own and are prepared to live in slums if it means they can provide a future for their children. The same way that when I was the homelessness czar and over this summer, if we wanted to prevent homelessness and people actually dying of COVID-19, we had to do a better job to prevent people ending up on the streets. The second thing I wanted to say, and I'm very conscious of time, and I can talk, unfortunately for Britain, as Daniela knows, I can do that for hours, so I'm trying to keep myself really short. To deal with the immediate problem in terms of the overflowing bathtub, the temptation is to find really easy solutions. The temptation is just to open up an awful lot of shelters. Now, in some countries, there are no shelters. In places like India, where it took a court judgment, a high court judgment, to instruct the authorities to create shelters, I'll take it. But actually, as Liz was talking about so eloquently just 5 minutes ago, if you can't help somebody permanently with the reasons that they may be homeless, such as drug addiction, such as domestic violence, such as the frailty of all of us, we're all humans, we're all frail, and some of us end up addicted to drugs, some of us end up addicted to alcohol. If you just do a simple solution, then people will recycle back into homelessness. So actually, we love housing first. It's not the solution to everything. We love some shelters. They're not the solution to everything. And I think that's what's really important, is to work out who is in your overflowing bathtub with data and research and evidence, and then work out what your solution is. And the final one there is, you have to make sure that this sorts out the homelessness system in the long term. If we don't help people chase their demons of drugs, which are addictive, and actually one is helpless in the face of that, particularly if you're on the streets, then they will just recycle back into homelessness. Homelessness, as Daniela talked about it earlier, is a transition. Doesn't have to be a permanent state in somebody's life. Actually, getting them a job, getting them housed, getting them support is where you want to go. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And I wanted to say that I've used that bathtub analogy on so many occasions because it's so simple and so straightforward. But please don't forget to start with how you switch the taps off. That is so profoundly important. And I do think we have cause for hope during this terrible time in the world, because actually colleagues in places like Tshwane in South Africa, Santiago in Chile, all improved their systems during COVID-19. I mean, it's not over yet. Until somebody has a perfect vaccine, we will still be living with our people who are homeless being disproportionately affected. Francesca, can we put the rather weird slide up, which is about birds? Now, some of you will have come across a very lovely and wonderful colleague of mine called Mark McGreevy, who was also part of all of this effort with IGH and Paul International. Now, Mark walked into his back garden one day in London and he saw a gentleman out with a thing, and he was ticking off certain things on the back, and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm counting birds." And then he realized that actually we count birds and analyze birds worldwide better than we do homeless people. So we can look at when certain species of birds are declining, when they're flying to different places because of probably climate change, whether they are increasing in number or decreasing in number, and we can get that globally. And so I think one of the most profound things that UN-Habitat and DESA have done in the last 18 months, with support from all of us, I hope, I really truly hope that we've all been able to help, is we have for the first time a description, a definition, and an acceptance that we need to count and measure people. Now, you're talking to a woman that has worked now for 5 UK prime ministers. I can tell you now that if you don't count it, it is not seen. If something isn't counted and it isn't collected up as numbers, it is not seen. It is not seen by politicians. And that's why what colleagues have done here is so, so important. And we also know that the UN itself, in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, is alive to measurement and alive to how we do that. So actually making sure that we are able to enumerate, define and count homeless people is so, so, so important. Now, the Institute of Global Homelessness, Lydia Stazen and a few other wonderful people in Chicago, tiny in number, because it's American, of course, it has to be called an institute and it has to be global and it has to pretend that it's huge. It's actually sort of 3 or 4 people in Chicago and me a bit in London. But what we are determined to do, and we're determined to work in partnership with anybody, is to get a decent, proper global survey of homelessness, and to sort of update and make more sophisticated the work that has been done 15 years ago on a global count of homelessness. And I truly believe that where people have let's just take it into the here and now. Sydney, Australia, has got a very good grip on the people who are on the streets. Call it a by name list, call it information about people on the streets, call it a survey. When it came to COVID-19 in the United Kingdom, in Sydney, in some other areas of the world, people could move so fast because they knew who they were looking for. So I think in close, COVID is a terrible thing, but Daniela is right. We can build back better to a more compassionate and more inclusive world. We won't meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 if we don't consider the people who have been left behind. And those people are going to be homeless people. So what I'm asking anybody on this call and on this wonderful session is, if you think you can help, then what we want to do, working with UN-Habitat, working with UN DESA, is take this definition, take this measurement, and put on the map the fragility of the people that we make homeless and we allow to stay homeless. And I feel very positive that we can do this and we can do it together. So I hope I haven't talked for too long. I was trying to bring myself in London time by 15:55, and it's now 15:57. So I will hand back to Chris, and just once again to all of the colleagues listening in on this call, whether that's Liz in Ireland, Chris in New York, Christoph actually in Nairobi alongside Robert. It's a real privilege, and I celebrate Liz and anybody else who has found their way out of homelessness, and I celebrate the people who have supported them in doing that. And I hope that we create a world post-COVID where there are many more stories to celebrate. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much, Louise. Really nice and comprehensive, really getting at the issues. I hope the bathtub and a story on homelessness features in the Financial Times one of these days. Get it out there. It tells the story so cleanly, and as you say, this prevention aspect is very key. And I was unaware of the progress made prior in the UK on homelessness, and how, despite that, it's sort of the envy of a lot of countries. It's fragile, and as COVID showed, there had to be a quick, rapid response. But to get at this long term, and to ensure that it is minimized, there's a lot of work needs to be done. And looking at the prevention measures and looking at this holistically and not specifically on the physical, as we heard from Liz earlier, is key. And of course, counting. If it's not there, if you can't count it, it's not there. Very much appreciate these updates and this thinking, and really, of course, all the work of the Institute of Global Homelessness. And your collective and collaborative efforts with the UN system. This is terrific. We are a bit running behind on time, but everybody's comments are good. So I'm just going to say that if you see my picture, I'm going to go off when you speak. And if you see me again and smiling, that means that I'd like you to wrap up. It's a polite way of doing that. So we're going to shift gears back to the UN system, but to a different part of the UN. And I'm really happy to see my colleague from ILO, Christina Bernhardt, who's the head of Social Policy Unit in the Social Protection Department within ILO, which is Geneva-based and deals with labor issues globally. She has work experience and assignments as a regional social security specialist at the ILO in the Regional Office of Arab States, which is based in Beirut. She has served as a consultant for International Social Security Association, the ISSA, and has been a lecturer and research fellow at the University of Constance. She has worked and published on various aspects of Social Security in both developed and developing country contexts. She has studied in Constance and in Edinburgh. Boy, we have a lot of Scottish and British energy here. This is great. She has earned a master's degree in politics and public administration and a PhD in social policy from the University of Constance in Germany. She has widely published on social protection in both developed and developing countries, including on social assistance and other cash transfers, the extension of social protection to those in informal economy, income distribution, poverty alleviation, as well as the distributive effects of various social protection benefits on poverty and inequality. She has also contributed to the ILO's World Social Protection Report, which we in the UN read very closely. That's an extremely important document that captures the social protection mechanisms globally, and several other ILO publications. She is currently focused mainly on the extension of social protection in low and middle income countries. I'm very happy that she's here for not just as a UN colleague, but the social protection discussion came out very strongly in the 58th session of the Convention on Social Development, so that we were not looking at homelessness purely as a housing issue, but looking at it from the perspective of social protection, both the quality of the social protection and what is happening both from state and non-state actors. So very relevant that Christina, you're here. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this very, very generous introduction. And hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you on this very first World Homelessness Day. And let me just try to get my presentation going. I just have prepared a number of slides, which are not as powerful as the base top, but I'm trying. Oh, sorry. I hope you can see it, but I'm trying to make the best of it. And indeed, I mean, as many of you have already pointed out, the COVID pandemic has had really kind of devastating consequences on people's health and countries' economic and social fabric. And we're still in the middle of it. And I think one thing that the crisis really has shown is that it has not only shattered the lives of those who were already vulnerable before, but it has also shown that many of those who had been kind of better off and we are not always thinking of someone in need of social protection, their lives have also been shattered. And I think this is really a very powerful reminder about the need of having social protection really for everyone. So really in the sense of universal social protection systems. And I think this is really kind of one of the key messages I really want to bring across in my short presentation, and I'm trying to stick to the time. And indeed, I mean, when we met in February this year for the Commission on Social Development, the world seemed to be in a very different place. But I think by now it has become even more important, as many of you have pointed out, to talk about homelessness, to talk about adequate housing, and to talk about social protection in an integrated way. And let me just quickly put some of the kind of figures on the table. It's definitely not ideal figures, but just to remind you, and these are just two indicators from the SDGs. On the left-hand side, you see the percentage of the world population not covered by social protection. And this is 55% of the global population not covered at all. And many of those 45% who have some form of coverage, quite often it's quite patchy and not really adequate. And on the other hand, taking as an indicator the proportion of the world's urban population living in slums, we also see that this is almost a quarter of the world's population. And obviously there are very strong interconnections between both. And this was the situation before the pandemic hit us. So when we are looking at what happened since February, basically, we see, and I think the good news is that we have seen, in many countries, we have seen social protection systems in action. So countries with quite strong social protection systems, they have really managed to mobilize them, and they have taken additional measures to further improve them. And those countries with kind of less strong systems, they have to really try to put in place emergency measures to support the population. And so what we see is that 208 countries, so basically all countries in the world, have taken kind of close to, what we have recorded is close to 1,500 policy measures to improve their social protection systems in a very short space of time. And quite often it's one-off measures, quite often it's temporary measures. But I think it shows that countries really have realized the power that they have at their disposal with the social protection systems to really make things happen, and make things happen that seemed to be impossible a couple of months ago. And these data actually come from the ILO COVID social protection monitor, where we monitor media reports on policy changes related to COVID. And this also includes a category on housing and basic services. And in that specific category, what we have recorded, which is certainly not complete, but we have recorded there 131 measures in 86 countries, which is already quite impressive. But I'm sure there's much more to the picture. But certainly, I mean, despite these impressive measures, I mean, we all know that this is by far not sufficient. I mean, as I said, many of those measures have been temporary, quite sometimes one-off, and we know that people's income security is really highly fragile at the moment. Many people are threatened by evictions, have already lost their homes, and are really facing challenges in terms of unemployment, in terms of poverty, and many other challenges. So basically, the question is really where do we go from here? I mean, when it comes to social protection systems, I mean, at the moment, we're really at the crossroads. We've seen what was possible in terms of policy responses in a very short space of time. And this is certainly something where we can learn from, and something we can further develop. So really making sure that we are reinvigorating social protection systems so that they really truly become universal, that there is actually a strong, solid social protection floor that can guarantee at least a basic level of the right to social security for everyone. But not just looking at the basic level, but I mean, we need to be more ambitious and make sure that the protection is adequate, that it's comprehensive. And obviously, this is not possible without sustainable and equitable financing. And also, we need to make sure that the systems are really adapting, I mean, to what's happening in the labor market, what's happening in the world of work, but also what's happening in the wider society. So, well, that is actually the situation that we would like to be in. But at the same time, I mean, countries have spent a lot, and in many cases have already reached the limits of what they think they can spend. And we see already in some countries there's already premature fiscal consolidation. And we have seen that also for the financial crisis, 2008, that countries very quickly after putting in place these stimulus packages, quite often they have kind of moved back and moved really into an austerity context. And with very kind of limited coverage, so social protection systems really limited to these kind of very kind of unstable safety nets, minimal benefits, just going to very, I mean, not really to all those who would need it, with very strong gaps in not just social protection, but also labor protection. And I think thinking of the bathtub and the taps that you need to switch off, obviously the labor market is really one of those tabs that needs to be addressed there. But within the social protection system, also limited solidarity, risk sharing, and redistribution, and definitely no decent work. So it's really the choice here that countries are faced with at the moment. And let me just make 3 points. Oh, I can already see you. That's good. So let me just make 3 points, and I'm not going to go through all of the details. The first point is, and this is really in terms of kind of having 3 priorities for the way ahead. The first one is really making sure that there is social protection extended to those who are not yet covered. These are those in the informal economy. It's many of those who have found to be very vulnerable, especially the self-employed, on-account workers, but also some in really kind of in very precarious forms of work. So this is really about reinvigorating the social protection systems and really extending coverage, but it's not just about coverage. It's really about coverage that is comprehensive and adequate and sustainable and adapted to the world of work. And I think thinking about it, and this really, what Liz said previously really resonated in that. I think one of the important points here is really having social protection systems that really can support people's dignity, that can be empowering. And I think this is really the vision that this is really trying to achieve. The second point, and obviously we need to talk about the financing, and this is really one of the big challenges. Already before the crisis, we have seen that social protection systems in many parts of the world have been kind of very strongly underfunded. So this is really one of the key areas, really making sure that there is sustainable financing, but also not just sustainable, but also equitable. And so this is really very much about safeguarding the fiscal space for social expenditure, further extending that fiscal space, because we all know that austerity could have really a significant negative impact on progress achieved. And in the ILO, we've been trying to estimate the financing gaps in countries with insufficient own capacities. So looking at the financing gap in developing countries, which is 1.2 trillion, but it sounds a lot. It's about 3.8% of the GDP of those countries. In low-income countries, we're talking about close to 80 billion, which is close to 16% of their GDP. And there, I think it becomes very clear that many countries don't have themselves the capacity to really fund and finance their social protection systems from their own domestic resources. So this is why international support, at least to build up these systems, will be very, very important as well. And I'm just rushing through that those slides, but let me get to the last priority. And this is really, again, the point about strengthening social protection systems, but with a bigger picture in mind, really not as a kind of isolated policies, but really trying to get at all these other tabs, to switch them off really in an approach that is preventative, that protects people's rights and dignity, and this is which is really empowering. So really strengthening the social protection systems themselves, but also ensuring that they're working well with employment policies, with wage policies, fiscal policies, infrastructure, housing policies, care policies. I think this is really one of the key points to really have an integrated and a holistic approach to developing social protection systems. And I think now is really the time to do it. And I would like to end just with this very last slide, reminding everyone that we have only 10 years to make social protection and adequate housing a reality for all. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Christine. And I know that you're dealing with a massive subject, and your ability to squeeze it into under 10 minutes is really helpful and difficult. But I think you've done us a good job in terms of getting that piece, particularly for people that are more in the housing space or the homeless, direct homeless interventions and actions, or have experienced homelessness. This is new territory, and I think the learning curve, I will speak for myself, is long, and we need to get into some of those nuances. But I really appreciate your efforts to capture sort of what was going on before COVID, what's happened with COVID, and sort of where we are, next steps. And if I've got part of your argument right, we need to be very careful because we're approaching a fiscal crisis that it looms in the next from January onwards, and how we're able to sustain the kinds of social protection measures that were introduced over the last couple of months with COVID, and to get to the level where it's systemic and it's integrated. This is a tall order, and I think we need to get serious about it. So thank you very much for that overview. We now turn to another colleague who will give us an overview of his work. This is, I'm sure I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but Freek Spinevinch. I'm sure you've heard that name pronounced 100 different ways, and this is probably not the worst. I apologize. He's the director of the European Federation of National Organizations Working with the Homeless, DESA, and he has a background in medieval history and European law and policy at the University of Leuven in Belgium. He has also undertaken a number of internships and voluntary work within the UN system, and had a short stay in Leuven where he worked as a research assistant, and became a key member of the European network of seniors organizations that recently merged with the European NGO into the organization AGE. So with this background, I'd like to open the floor to Freek, and if you could give us your thoughts. Thank you. Again, I will go offline, and when we're getting towards the end of your presentation, I will reappear to remind you to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to share my screen. I hope that has worked. Do you see the screen?
Yes, you can see the screen.
Okay, thanks a lot, and don't worry about the pronunciation of my name. Actually, my first name I'm more worried about, because in English people call me Freek, and that is not a very nice word in English, I've been told, and it's actually Freek. So I prefer people to call me Frederick. But anyway, no worries about my name. I have been asked to speak a little bit about the definition of homelessness, and I think it's because FIANSA has developed a definition. I have to say before I start that the definition has been developed in a European context, so it's not a global definition, but it can probably serve as an inspiration for you. Let me first, I don't know if the slides move, but I have, let me check. I cannot get them to move. Oh yes, now sorry, now it moves. I think I'm going to state the obvious, but I guess that the importance of a definition, a good definition of homelessness, cannot be underestimated. Louise Casey already referred to the importance of data collection, saying that if you don't collect data, you don't exist. Well, you cannot collect proper data if you don't have a proper definition. So I think a definition is really important. Also at UN level, because because what we learned is that you need a good definition to have effective transnational cooperation and comparison. If you don't, if you're not clear about your definition, you tend to speak next to each other. You might think you understand each other, but you're probably talking about very different things. So that to start with. Now, we developed a definition in 2004, so it's quite some time ago, which we call Ethos, the European Typology of Homelessness and Housing Exclusion. And it was a really, really difficult exercise. I put there that it took us 10 years of debate to come to this kind of definition. And debate is a nice word here because sometimes it was more like a war than a friendly debate. So you see how sensitive the defining a concept like homelessness can be. Now, we have not developed a definition as a one-fit-all definition. Is more like a framework definition, a reference, a definition that can be used as a reference. That definition has actually been formally endorsed by the European Consensus Conference on Homelessness, which was a conference that took place in 2010, and that was organized by the European Union. So since then, it has some kind of an official status, you could say. And at the moment, it's actually used as a reference in several European countries by policymakers, but it's especially used as a reference in academia, by academia, in the academic world. If you read articles about homelessness, you will often see that the article starts with a reference to the Ethos definition to basically pitch clarify well what the article is really about. So I think it has been quite a success. Now, what is this definition? Without going into any great detail, what we try to do is to define what a home is. And for us, it has three dimensions. A legal dimension, which refers to the security of tenure, the security of a home. The social dimension, which refers to whether your home allows proper social interactions, sufficient privacy, and these kind of things. And then obviously the physical dimension, which is about the structure. And we try to use these three dimensions to come to a definition of what homelessness is. And that led us to categorize homelessness according to 4 conceptual categories and 13 operational categories. And the 4 conceptual categories are, first of all, rooflessness. That's consensual. These are the people that sleep on the street or in night shelter, but are forced to live on the street for part of the day or the whole day. Houselessness, which is the people that live in the homeless system, shelters, short-term shelters, emergency shelters, long-term shelters, etc. But also people in asylum centers for asylum seekers, for instance, or houses for women fleeing domestic violence are also part of that. And then the 2 more controversial categories are the inadequately housed and the insecurely housed. We don't say that everybody who's inadequately housed is homeless, but we say that there is a dimension of inadequate housing that amounts to the experience of homelessness, as well as insecure housing. Now, our Ethos definition looks like this. I'll put a link on the side so you can look at it at ease. So you see the conceptual categories and then the 13 operational categories. Now, what I wanted to focus on for a couple of minutes is what's the logic behind the Ethos classification. First of all, we wanted to capture the reality of extreme exclusion in Europe.
Hi, John. This is Chris Williams calling. Long time since we met in Lagos. Do give me a call. It's rather time sensitive. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get your contact. We're organizing
I think there was somebody forgetting to mute. What we wanted to do is to capture the reality of extreme exclusion in Europe. We felt, for instance, that the UN definition of extreme poverty didn't reflect that kind of European reality of extreme exclusion. We also tried to capture the dynamic nature of homelessness, and I think Louise Casey referred to that. You're not rough sleeping forever, or you're not staying in a shelter forever, or you're not in very inadequate housing forever. You tend to move between these categories and preferably out of these categories. So we try to capture homelessness as a process. We also try to overcome the service paradox. We didn't want to have a narrow definition that would lead to countries with a lot of shelter capacity having a lot of homeless people, and those countries not investing in shelter capacity having little homeless people. And that was very much the difference between East and West Europe. If you only focus on the homeless system, the homeless shelter system, homelessness would be a real issue in Western Europe and would not be an issue at all in Eastern Europe. It's changing now a little bit, but we try to capture also the experience of homelessness in very inadequate housing, very insecure housing, and rough sleeping. And the third thing is that we wanted to integrate into the definition housing as a key determinant. The definition clearly promotes housing-led policies, housing-led solutions to homelessness, and that's what we are arguing for. What the Ethos definition is absolutely not is a hierarchy of the severity of the exclusion. So we don't want to argue that rough sleeping is worse than shelter, and shelter is worse than inadequate housing, and inadequate housing is worse than insecure housing. Within these conceptual categories, you can have severity that is not according to that hierarchy. So I think that's important to emphasize. Now, there was a bit of controversy when we developed the definition. One of the controversies was from the homeless sector, that it includes other sectors, like the asylum centers or the sector or the service sector dealing with supporting women fleeing domestic violence. And we try to say, but we have to make abstraction of the sector as it is organized and think of the three dimensions of a home and define, and dare have the courage to define homelessness more broadly. And also another criticism was that it includes solutions to homelessness or improvements in the lives of homeless people. So we include long-term reintegration shelters, which might be better than short-term or emergency shelters, but we still think it's not a solution. So that's why it's still considered homelessness. Now, for reasons of consensus, and also to make data collection slightly more easy, we have developed an Ethos Light definition, which might be inspiring for work at global level as well, which tried to reduce the 13 operational categories to half of those, to 6 operational categories, and to make it more consensual. So there you have roofless, like I said, people rough sleeping and staying in night shelter, houseless, but without the people in migration accommodation, the inadequately housed, but only those living in places that are not intended for habitation, like caves and stuff like that, and the insecurely housed, but only the sofa surfers. And that definition, what we call the Ethos Light, has really been picked up by policymakers as a good definition to base their homeless policies on. My last slide is the way forward, because I was asked, like, what's the way forward at UN level? Well, I think, and it might sound too simple and too simplistic, but I think it's necessary, it's to include or promote homelessness as an indicator for SDG 1 or SDG 11. At the moment, like was said by the previous speaker, the indicators are slum dwellers for SDG 11 and people earning less than $1.9 a day for SDG 1. And that doesn't capture housing rights violations or extreme poverty sufficiently, certainly not in a European context. And now that homelessness has been integrated so strongly in the new urban agenda, I think, and the urban agenda is so strongly, so closely linked to the SDGs, I think it's about time that we try to integrate homelessness as an indicator of SDG 1 and or SDG 11 with all the consequences that that has for the statistical machinery of the UN. Thank you.
Wow, Freek, thanks very much. I appreciate the effort to try to really get into the details on both definition and this issue of capturing what's going on as an indicator. And I think that speaks to Luis's point that if you can't count it, it's not going to be considered at the level of policymakers. I know for some on the call, this level of detail may seem removed from the reality of homelessness on the ground. But I just want to encourage those coming from that perspective that actually this stuff is really important, because getting a handle on how we measure this has enormous implications for how governments are held accountable in the absence of dealing with these kinds of policies, what kind of resources are allocated, and what kind of programming is done, and the quality of that programming. So I really appeal to those that may be a bit skeptical on the numbers and this sort of, wow, this is really complicated. It is worth going through for the policymakers. They need this stuff. And when it comes out on the other end, it has huge implications, especially for resource allocation, as we saw in the UK. So, Frick, thanks very much. Our last speaker is, again, not from the policy perspective, not from the numbers perspective or analytical perspective, but zeroing in more specifically on the human condition and homelessness as it's experienced, but also for those who have been homeless and lived through it, how they're able to share with others and contribute in a meaningful way and in a systematic manner. So we have with us today as our last speaker, Iris Bailey, and she's originally from North Carolina, is currently residing in Far Rockaway, New York. She completed Washington Irving High School in New York. She is a passionate advocate for persons experiencing homelessness, as I mentioned, because she herself has experienced homelessness. She has participated in and contributed to a number of organizations called Life Experience and Faith Sharing Associates in New York, where she has been an active member, contributing to the homelessness in terms of information about housing resources, food, health issues, clothing. And you can imagine in this era of COVID, this has become extremely useful. And as was mentioned by earlier speakers, not just with the people that were homeless before COVID, but for the people who became homeless because of COVID or found themselves needing these kinds of services and support. She has spoken at the Commission for Social Development and given her direct experiences, and we're really glad to have her here with us today. Iris, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh,
we can hear you. We're
okay.
good, and we can see you, and you're all set. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Okay, now I do have like a lot of issues and concerns about in this day and time during COVID, especially when it comes to affordable housing. Like because our government has the right to say what's affordable, but it doesn't match to what's out here in everyday life. You have people that are on public assistance, which they are not able to receive certain benefits, which are vouchers, unless it was a Section 8. And we all know in New York City, Section 8 is closed down. So you have those people that remains in the shelter, even if they are unemployable, because if you are you're dealing with Social Security and you're disabled and you're not able to collect it, they put you on public assistance. And by being on public assistance, you can't do certain things, you're not eligible. Like the housing assistance, they do offer housing assistance, but it's only to a particular audience. That's for people with children, or you're a senior over 65, then they'll give it to you. Also, you have like if they would give out more housing vouchers, it would help plentiful, but make it also for all, not just for the women. I mean, women, single women with children, they can get it. It can't be a single male or a single woman. She's not eligible, or him not eligible for no type of voucher at all. There's no voucher at all. And the rents here in New York City starts at $1,000. Okay, if you want someplace decent. We also, the same voucher that I'm speaking on, if Bill de Blasio leaves, that voucher is also in jeopardy. So that puts a lot of people in jeopardy of being evicted as well. And if you let me just get, I got my notes here. I just want to touch on everything. Let Now, during the COVID, right, we have a lot of evictions. Now, these evictions, you have to remember, you have evictions, you have homeless. Now, we're all in the same market. Okay, when you're going for this one apartment, it used to be 20, now it's 40. People are downsizing. The evictions are coming out just yesterday. In the Bronx, they landlords, 600 landlords put in for an evictions, and in Queens, 1,500, and it goes on and on. Also, I want to touch on, like, here in New York City, when COVID hit, they wanted to clean out trains and keep us protected. I go along with that. They also offered hotels for those that they were taken out of the train station that were homeless. But if you didn't take up on it, they just left you. But I feel like they failed them, because you have to realize that this person doesn't have the right mental health if they're making a decision like that. So if you put something in plan like that, I think somebody else should have been back there to help these people. If you look at Times Square and our neighborhoods today, people are living on the street like this is a third world country, and this is New York City. Times Square has people sleeping on the street. They're inside the banks, and you can't get mad, but you're unsafe. You're not safe, because these are mental health people. They're living in the ATMs, the banks, with no help, and they walk past. And I'm quite sure our mayor see it all. Our soup kitchens, our pantries, the vouchers. Now, not only people in the shelter want them, people that are being evicted or in process of being evicted are on lines. We have lines going around the corners 2 and 3 times just for meals. This shouldn't be going on. And I feel like we've been, like, in a lot of ways, our government are not truly looking at the whole picture. We need more help. It's more people that needs support. I agree with Liz. Like, when I left the shelter, I feel like I didn't have the help. That once you get your place, it's over with. No, you have to be deprogrammed. It's not a good life living in there, because you're living with all walks of life. And I mean all walks of life. You have to be something that you're not. And there's no help for that as well. I think that it should be a time when we all think and we all look and say, everyone deserves to say, my home, I'm going home, I live here, this is my mailing address. Everyone is entitled to that. It's very hurtful. I do my job, what I'm supposed to do. I'm a godly person. I follow God. And what would Jesus do? Jesus helped people, and that's me. My attitude is, like, I have a friend. She's my best friend I met in the shelter. She lost both of her breasts in the shelter. They sent her back to the same room. There's 3 people live in the room. And they sent her back there, didn't put her in a medical shelter with drainage on both her breasts. She also suffered with MS, and she had water on the brain. So when she was in there, she had no help. I was helping her until I got my apartment, but I still in contact with her, as she's still living in the shelter. A young lady that lives in the shelter with her, right next to her, caught COVID. She went to the hospital and she wasn't sick enough for them to keep her. They sent her back to the shelter in the same room, right next to my friend who's suffering from cancer, on chemo, not supposed to be around certain things because her immune system is compromised. No help. She stayed like that for a whole month. I fought, I argued, but today she's in the hotel alone. But it's no help. We are failing. And I mean, as a whole, it's just more love, dignity, respect. Stop overlooking. You see it. You can walk past and you see, you know. But I think the best thing that would help is addressing mental health. Mental health has to be addressed because either it's emotional or something else. But I know if you address the mental health of the situation, a lot of people I learned that 60% of people that are homeless and living in shelters and down to 70% that are street homeless have suffered or is suffering with mental health. That needs to be addressed. If you see New York City, you have people walking the streets, don't know the difference between summer from winter, from fall. It needs to be addressed. The trains, you're afraid. I mean, as a normal citizen, we just need help. So I need mental health, care, food, income, affordable housing, and just for someone to say, this is my home. Thank you.
Iris, thank you so much for sharing your views on this issue and the specifics of your condition and the people around you and what you've been doing. And to me, this speaks about a couple of things. Let me just say my own perspective. One is that I think you've reinforced what a lot of people have been talking about today, which is we can't shoehorn this thing into housing alone. You know, housing is a big part of it. That's been helpful. That's certainly an element. But as everybody said throughout this discussion, there's other things going on. There are health issues. There's one state of mind and the trauma that they're experiencing and getting through. And there's a range of issues in terms of the policy environment in which we're working in. And you say the change of mayor, that could shift everything in terms of the voucher system. So there's a lot of pieces to this thing, and I think you've done a really good job in giving us some sense of what those are. And I like the way you went from the very personal issue with your friend to sort of what's happening in terms of change of leadership in the city government and what that's going to do. And those are two sides to this. So thank you to Iris. Ladies and gentlemen, we are unfortunately run up against the clock. We were hoping to have a broader discussion and sort of dialogue on this and then sort of get into a Q&A section, but we've not been able to do that. And many of us have commitments at this time and are going to have to sign off. But what I like about this discussion thus far is that because it was put on YouTube, I think it's something that we can all look at again. And think through and analyze and sort of say, okay, what were the common themes that went through this? Where people from in different parts of the world and different stations in life, how are they addressing it? And I think that's good raw material for those that are keen to follow up on this issue. And follow up takes different levels. It can be in a particular at the household level with friends and communities in terms of what can be done next. But can also be done with my colleagues and I here in the UN and those that are working with governments and trying to get the right policies in place and put the right pressures on the system so that people working at the individual level have a better operating environment in which to work. In other words, they've got ammunition, they've got things that they can work on, that can hold people accountable to what's not working. So I just want to wrap up with 4 quick themes that I've heard, and I apologize that I'm not able to open this up for everybody to talk, so I'll just give a quick wrap so we can bring this thing to a close. But I'm hearing four things, these are my thoughts on some reflections. The first is political will. Are the people that have the authority to allocate resources, are they willing to go the extra mile on this? Are they willing to recognize that this is a serious problem that needs addressing, particularly during COVID? But can COVID be a way of kind of shining the light on this problem so that it's addressed more systematically? So this whole question of political power and influence, and that's among governments in the international community, at the UN, it's individual governments, it's state and local government, very key, because often, as Iris has said, they have their fingers on what is going to make or break things for people. So you've got to put a lot of pressure on that. But they don't operate in isolation. If the international community is moving in a certain direction, activists can put that in front of the mayors and say, "Hey, this is the trend. Are you with the program?" So this is I think part of it is a political will. The second, and we heard a lot about that, is what are we measuring? What's the definition? We have different, we got to cover the whole world here in the UN. So sometimes our definitions get too broad, but if we provide a good definition that is flexible enough to be applied in different places in different ways, then it can be useful to people on the ground to put pressure on policymakers so that they allocate those resources and deal with programs that are more effective. So this measurement and definition piece is really key. And on the one hand, I think we've widened the definition of homelessness. We don't want to just deal with people that are sleeping rough. We want to talk about people that have inadequate housing, and they may have a house and roof over their heads, but a lot of other things are not there that need to be dealt with, whether that's health issues, public health issues, drug addiction, and dealing with abuse, dealing with absence of employment, or the social protection measures and vouchers that can be made available to them. If that's not going on, the housing is really only a partial solution. So how do we think about that definition so that it allows us to capture that? But at the same time, how do we prevent the definition from being so broad that it gets diluted? And this is a trade-off. And I've dealt with this with a lot of other issues, and not just in homelessness. And we got to be smart about how we do that. That's going to take all of our thinking. The third is, and I think Christine really put her finger on it, but so did everybody, if I think about it, this comprehensive and integrated approach. So if you're going to go about homelessness, are you being smart about the systems that are in place to deal with a lot of other related issues which will benefit homelessness, but then they'll have like a co-benefit, a spin-off, so that we're dealing with housing generally, not just for homelessness, but affordable housing. We're dealing with strengthening the public and mental health systems so that homeless people are addressed, but also more broadly, those public health systems are stronger, et cetera. So thinking through how we're smart about the context in which we're working, the systems that touch on homelessness, so that we not only deal with homelessness in a comprehensive way, but in dealing with homelessness, we have good spin-offs in dealing with these systems that need help anyway. So this kind of thinking, maybe I'm not clear, but that I think thinking in that direction of what we mean by an integrated approach, what is comprehensive. And then lastly, and really back to Iris and Liz, we really need your voice. That's got to be part of this discussion. And I really want to applaud the Institute of Global Homelessness. Any event I've been involved with you guys, you make sure that that voice is in the discussion. It's not level of policy. In the UN, we tend to get caught up in our things, and we get very insular, and we are at the level of experts and policymakers and diplomats. This needs to be complemented by the voice and agency of people, and data that's generated by them, with them, for them, so that this becomes part of the solution, and they're in a stronger position to articulate their position. So that if they are part of data gathering exercises and analysis, then they are in a stronger position to articulate their views and be part of the policy debate, part of the policy dialogue, influencing policymakers. And that's something that has to be facilitated well, particularly by groups like the Institute of Global Homelessness. But we at the UN need to be very smart about how we support groups like the Institute of Global Homelessness and others to allow that kind of thing to happen, so that we create the space for people that are experiencing homelessness and those that have taken a strong position in terms of improving the situation by helping others, that's brought into the conversation. That's brought into the thinking in terms of what policies are necessary. So to me, this boils down to basics. It's dignity and respect. How do we keep that up in front when we're talking about homelessness, and not get so caught up in the policy piece that we lose sight of the reality on the ground? So I know I'm not speaking to the converted here. I'm not speaking to the new. I'm speaking to the converted. A lot of people know this and they take it for granted, but I think it warrants a reiteration at moments like this. So, folks, this is brief, just a wrap up. And again, I'm sorry that I can't open the floor to everybody else, but I just want to make a shout out to a couple of people that have made all this possible behind the scenes, and in particular, in addition to Daniela Boss, Makiko, thank you so much. You really put a lot of time into this. Kudos to you. And then on our side, in addition to Robert and myself, behind us were a lot of people. Francesca De Ferrari was instrumental in keeping this going. She represented Habitat at the Commission on Social Development while many of us were in Abu Dhabi, and led the organization very well. Christophe Lalonde, who helped to coordinate the meeting back in May 2019, and has been a force in this process, and Francesca Leonetti, who really also has done a lot of the background work. If I sounded like I was making sense in this session, we can thank that partly to Francesca, but I'm not giving her responsibility for anything I said wrong. That's my fault. So this is on just a handful of the people. There are many more. Leon was instrumental in getting the technology set up, and it's now working on 7 o'clock in Nairobi. So thank you for that, Leon. And in closing, I just want to thank Luis, you and your colleagues at the Institute. We look forward to working with you more in the future. Danielle, I had to scoot off to another meeting, but Makiko, please share with her that this is not the end of the discussion. We're going to keep working with DESA on this. And Christina, thank you so much for bringing in the ILO's perspective. I think there's more work that needs to be done, but let's make that happen. And Frick, I'm saying your name correctly, Frick, not Freak. Frick, thanks so much for your work, and I hope that you can keep the European charge going on this and bring us forward. And of course, Iris and Liz, thanks for telling us straight. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Margaret.